Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, ESPN's Matt Miller and Jordan Reid, they had an hour-long pre-draft conference call on Friday. Got a lot of the highlights from that you'll hear on the show today. Excited about that. Always love draft talk. And look, we're less than a month away from the first round of the NFL draft. Plus your calls and texts will close out the show on this Monday, April 3rd, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raider podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts and get the latest edition of the show as soon as it's available. And if you're checking us out on YouTube, I do appreciate you. We appreciate everyone who checks us out and subscribes to our YouTube page. It has been growing in a major way, and that's only because my guy Ari, at Ari Produces on Twitter, does a fantastic job each and every day, so we definitely appreciate him. But let's go ahead and get into the show. Coming off a fun weekend, a lot of college hoops that I was able to watch, soak in over the weekend. That was really good. And shout out to LSU. The women Tigers came home with the first national championship in their history. And Coach Kim Mulkey with her fourth national championship, 3 at Baylor, now 1 at LSU. That was really fun to watch on Sunday. So let's go ahead and jump into the news and notes here in segment number 1. There wasn't a whole lot coming off the weekend. It was kind of a quiet weekend for the Silver and Black, but my man Vinny Bonsignore put out a tweet that I thought was pretty interesting, a nice little nugget. He said, the Raiders have added 16 new players through free agency so far. They'll add 12 plus through the draft and undrafted free agents. Moving forward, they have to get away from the entirely too high roster change numbers every single offseason. Then he went on to say 7 of the 16 free agents that they added are on 2-year contracts or longer. If they put together a strong draft, undrafted free agents, they have a chance of reducing that turnover number in 2024. I guess that was from Vinny Bonsignore. And that was one thing that GM Dave Ziegler said to me when we were at the owners' meetings in Phoenix, Arizona. He mentioned that, the plan going into free agency was to get away from the 1-year deals, get more guys on a 2-year, 3-year deal, more of a commitment type thing. They're trying to build this roster, and what they can't do is continue to turn over the roster each and every year. Get a bunch of guys on 1-year deals, then let them walk in free agency. Then get a bunch of guys on 1-year deals and let them walk in free agency. At some point, you have to have a consistent roster, and that's what they're trying to do. So if everything goes the way that they want it to go in the draft, which we know that's a crapshoot, but if it does, ideally, they'll come away with some starters and some quality depth and be able to have their team. And then they'll be able to go into free agency and grab one big fish here, one big fish there, or go into, the draft needing a right tackle. Okay, let's go target and get the best right tackle. Okay, or need, this center, or need a edge rusher, or need one more corner. They'll be able to be a little bit more picky and choosy with what they do. But right now, with the way that they've turned the roster over year after year after year, they've got to be able to just get and develop and try to draft as much possible talent as possible. So a lot of the guys that they signed in free agency weren't guys with big names. They were guys that are hungry, guys that want a chance to prove that they can get it done. And then also they're trying to fill a few holes just in case they don't get the guy that they're looking at in the upcoming draft. So they kind of just targeted both. Obviously, everyone's not going to make it. Some guys they signed in free agency won't even make it to camp. Once the draft is wrapped up and the undrafted free agents are signed, some of the guys that they've signed in free agency will be let go. I promise you that. So that's just kind of the nature of the beast. But what Vinny said about them having that high roster turnover every year has to change sooner rather than later. Also, there was a report over the weekend from Jeremy Fowler from ESPN that he's hearing the Raiders are considering drafting Anthony Richardson at 7 if he's there during the 2023 NFL Draft. And, that could be multiple different things. The Raiders, this staff is really good at not letting stuff out of the building. Again, I mentioned, I believe on Friday's show, that Albert Breer, he does a really good job of talking to Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels. And when he puts stuff out there, I really listen because I know how close he is. But for the most part, this staff does a really good job of not letting too much out there unless they want stuff out there. A lot of times they'll hit up Vinny and he'll put something out there because, well, they want it out there and they know that he's going to put it out there, or whoever else they decide to tell it to. Like, they don't tell me anything because they know I'll tell it all. They're like, nope, we ain't gonna tell that radio dude, because that radio dude will go and tell everything. So they don't go and come to me with any kind of information like that. If I get any information, it's all from questions. And you heard the conversation I had with GM Dave Ziegler. Every answer he gave was a good answer, but not necessarily a very specific answers. So, yeah, just kind of, I guess, take it with a grain of salt. Look, I wouldn't be surprised if the Raiders are looking at Anthony Richardson. I know they took him out to dinner. I know they had a really good dinner with him before his pro day. Know that Dave Ziegler was the first guy on the field after his pro day to congratulate him. But I also know head coach Josh McDaniels was not there. So take that for what it's worth. But definitely wouldn't be surprised if they were interested in Anthony Richardson. And honestly, I'll tell you, as I said on Friday's show, I'm kind of interested in Anthony Richardson, right? After hearing about how coachable he is, after hearing about how hard of a work ethic he has, and that he's very intelligent on the whiteboard, I'm very intrigued by Anthony Richardson, and that is a big change from where I was, 2-3 weeks ago. So there's that. Now, I do want to go ahead and start jumping into some of this Matt Miller and Jordan Reid breakdowns from the conference call that ESPN had on Friday, and it was really good. It was about an hour long, and it's funny, it was only a select few of us. I think it was about 25 to 30 of us on the call at most. And normally, like whenever I get on with Mel Kiper Jr. or Daniel Jeremiah, it's like 200 people. So there was a very intimate setting. It was great. It was only 1 hour long, but we were able to ask about 25 to 30 questions. So I thought some really good stuff. And we'll start with the big elephant in the room, which is Jalen Carter, right? I mean, he's a guy that I feel like his draft stock is kind of all over the place. I don't think he gets out of the top 10. I really don't think he gets past Seattle at 5, but that's just me. But here's Jordan Reid, who's really good. He actually put out a full 7-round mock draft not too long ago. Matt Miller is going to be putting his out pretty soon, but Jordan Reid is fantastic at what he does. Here's Jordan Reid's thoughts on Jalen Carter.
I think he's the best player in this draft class, but we've all seen the type of pre-draft process that he's had. He's got his off-the-field stuff resolved as far as with the misdemeanors and getting that settled, which is great for him ahead of the draft. But with Jalen, I think you're going to have to bring him into a structured environment. He needs to go into a veteran-laden locker room just because there's some things that he's going to have to iron out as far as how he's going to react once he gets a little bit more money. And then also how is he going to react in a NFL style of locker room? So with Jalen, the talent is not the question. Everybody knows that he's arguably the best player in this draft class. It's just how is he going to be on the next level, and then what type of player exactly are you getting?
So there's Jordan Reid just breaking down who Jalen Carter is and what kind of player he is, dynamic player, and obviously the off-the-field issues. Every single team's got to do their due diligence when it comes to Jalen Carter. So what did Matt Miller think about Jalen Carter? Here he is.
Talking to scouts about Jalen Carter, what everyone has said is the locker room, like Jordan said, it needs to be structured. But you need leaders in there that he will, kind of get in line with. And talking to people at Georgia, one thing I heard consistently was Jordan Davis and Kobe Dean were those players for him. They led that locker room, and everyone followed. Everyone got in lockstep. Now, in a vacuum of those leaders being gone, there wasn't anyone to step up and make sure that Jalen Carter, showed up to practice on time, practice hard. Our colleague Todd McShay mentioned it before the news came out about the accident, that there were concerns about football character with Jalen Carter. So I think the risk is big. We've seen situations like this before where you hear rumblings of like, hey, this guy might need some extra motivation. He might need extra attention in terms of, now you're a professional. It's not just go to class, come to practice. This is your whole life is this job basically. And is he in a situation where he's mature enough to take on that responsibility and adhere to that schedule? I think that's why, like, wherever he gets drafted, I keep saying Philadelphia. I don't think he'll last to 10. Philadelphia would be so perfect for him because those leaders who were at Georgia are there. Like, they're in place. They're ready to go. So wherever he ends up, I think that will be the hope. Is you almost want to assign him a big brother who says, all right, here's how we do things here. This is how it works. This is where you need to be when you need to be there to make sure that he can realize that potential. Because on talent, he's the best player in this draft. We've been saying that for 2 years. He was the best player on Georgia the last 2 years, and we know how great that defense was. So I know for one, I'm hoping that he gets things figured out and we get to see him realize that.
So I think everyone agrees that Jalen Carter is easily the best player in the draft, right? If it's not him, it's probably Bijan Robinson, which is crazy, right? A running back and a defensive tackle that there's questions about are the two probably best players in this upcoming draft, and who knows where they're going to be drafted. I think that Jalen Carter is going to go 5 to Seattle, and I think Bijan Robinson, a good landing spot would be for him, number 10 with the Eagles. Can you imagine Bijan Robinson being thrown in the mix with the Eagles? Look out. Like, I think that if the Raiders didn't have so many holes, I would love to see them go get him, even though they have Josh Jacobs, they have Zamir White, they have, Britton Brown, they have all kind of different running backs in the stable. But, I mean, that's just a difference maker. We've had a couple people call and talk about Bijan Robinson. And yeah, he's just that much of a dude, but the Raiders just have too many holes to fill to be able to have a luxury like Bijan Robinson at this stage of the game, as much as I hate to say that. One more edge rusher that I wanted to get a little bit of a breakdown from was here's Jordan Reid talking about Texas Tech edge rusher Tyree Wilson, who is a guy who's flying up many different mock drafts, and he could be a guy that could be gone in the top 10 easily, probably will be gone in the top 10. Here's Jordan Reid talking about Tyree Wilson.
Yeah, so Tyree's a guy that I actually got a chance to see him play live against NC State this year, which is one of his better games. And I mean, the dude looks like he has a costume on when you see him in person. He's every bit of 6'6", 275 pounds. But the thing about him is that he's just a big guy on the playground right now. That's bigger than everybody. He doesn't have a lot of counter moves, wins a lot off of his natural ability, but you're banking on his upside with him. So if you have proper coaching and you have some patience with him, I think you're getting a big time player, but he's not one that's going to come in and maybe make an instant type of impact off of his, off of polish. He's more so winning off of his natural ability, but we know college offensive linemen are nowhere near as good as NFL offensive linemen. So he's going to have to improve some things in his toolbox and get some more moves in his repertoire in order to get better to reach his full potential. But we saw last year with Trayvon Walker, who went number 1 overall. He's nowhere near as explosive as Trayvon Walker, but we know these NFL coaches, they're going to gravitate towards traits. And that's what Tyree Wilson does have.
So there you go. Jordan Reid right there on Texas Tech edge rusher Tyree Wilson. And the one thing about Tyree Wilson is I know the coach that he plays for or played for at Texas Tech, and that's Joey McGuire. Joey McGuire was an assistant coach at Baylor, and then now he has his own program. And actually, he was a high school coach first in Texas and did really good things in high school, won multiple state championships, and then went to Baylor as an assistant coach. And he's just got that fire and energy. And I'm actually going to talk to him. I'm supposed to talk to him sometime this week on the radio show, Raider Nation Radio 920 Unnecessary Roughness. I don't know what day that's going to be, but I guarantee that's going to be a great conversation. And he's a big fan of Tyree Wilson. Obviously, he plays in his program, but he'll give me all the ins and outs of him. So sometime this week, I'll hear from Joey McGuire. And of course, when I do, I'll bring that to the podcast as well. But Tyree Wilson is a name that is very intriguing, and I would have no problem. It's another defensive player that I would have no problem with the Raiders grabbing. And there's multiple guys, right? If they felt like Jalen Carter was a good fit, so be it. Who am I to say that you can't grab him? So Jalen Carter, if that was the guy, cool. Tyree Wilson, if that's the guy, cool. Christian Gonzalez, defensive back out of Oregon, if that's the guy, cool. Devin Witherspoon out of Illinois, yep, it's cool. All of those defensive players, I would have no problem with the Raiders grabbing because they're difference makers and they're guys that they need. They need more difference makers. They can't have Jags. And what I mean by that is just another guy. They can't have just another guy. They've got to have difference makers. That's the key. They have one difference maker on defense right now. His name is Max Crosby. They need more. So if they're going to go get one of those guys, like a Tyree Wilson, to be across from Max, that'd be fantastic. But again, they have plenty of different options at that position and less than a month to decide it as the draft gets started on April 27th. In Kansas City. So that's what I got for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, kind of news and notes plus a little sound bites from Matt Miller and Jordan Reid. Coming up in segment number 2, we're going to flip things over to the offensive side of things and not really going to talk about C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young because we know that's quarterback 1 and 2, but how about Anthony Richardson, and how about are there any other quarterbacks that might be worth drafting even in the first round? We'll do that all with Matt Miller and Jordan Reid coming up in segment number 2 after I tell you about the Ultimate Football GM, and that's basically what we're doing right now. We're not playing the game, but we're talking the game, the Ultimate Football GM. And what is that? That is a game where you're doing everything. You're basically Dave Ziegler. You get all your players, you draft your players, you sign your free agents, you hire your coaches, you go through the ups and downs of a regular season. I mean, you're responsible for everything. And that's what we've been talking about on the podcast anyway, right? Just going through and trying to build a roster. That's what the Ultimate Football GM does. It's all challenging. It's a realistic game. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. All Locked On Raider podcast listeners will get 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On. It's all caps. It's in the game store. It's Locked On. It's all caps. So make sure to check it out today. Download the game. Just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the App Store. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, here we go. Raider Nation, segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to continue with the breakdowns from Matt Miller and Jordan Reid from ESPN. Was on that conference call on Friday. It was 1 hour long, 1 hour strong. A lot of really good sound bites that came out of that. And draft season is my favorite time of year. I mean, I love the regular season, obviously. Love the playoffs, Super Bowl, all that good stuff. But when it comes to events, especially that I've been to, the draft is always my favorite. Super Bowl's great. Going to the combine was fantastic. The owners' meetings was cool, but the draft is the best. It is just, every single team, every single fan base believes that their team is about to get the right player or players to take their team to the next level. And just seeing the excitement and hearing the excitement in the voices of the fans is so much fun. Plus, seeing all these young players seeing their dreams come true as they are being drafted into the National Football League is a lot of fun. And getting to talk to them before they even become professionals is a lot of fun as well. So the process leading up to the draft is a lot of fun. And I'll tell you right now, if the Raiders hit on the right players, they can turn this thing around, right? Nobody thought Seattle was going to be a playoff team last year after they let Russell Wilson go to Denver, but they were, right? Nobody thought that the Jets were going to be a team that was fighting for the playoffs, but they were because they had a strong draft. Like, if you have a really strong draft, and the Raiders have 12 draft picks right now, 12. If they hit on a nice little handful of guys, and I'm not saying they all have to be super studs, they don't all have to be Hall of Famers, they just have to be really good players. So if you hit on 3 or 4 guys, and, I think 3 starters for sure, I think the Raiders have to come out of this draft with about 3 starters, and I prefer them on defense. You get those 3 starters, and you get a handful of guys that you feel like could be some quality depth, I'm good with that. That's how you start to turn around your team, but you have to hit on the draft, and that's what separates the good from the bad, right? Because there's been a lot of players I've looked at and I was like, yeah, that's going to be a stud. Grab that guy, and he turned out to be not worth the salt. But then there's some guys that I hit on. If I'm going to talk bad about myself, I got to give myself some credit too. There was some players that I hit on, even on this podcast, pounded the table and said that was going to be a good player, and it turned out to be. So it's almost a 50-50, right? Even if they're a great player in college, doesn't mean they're going to be great in the NFL. It's such a crapshoot. But if you have it down and you figure out how to hit on the draft, all of a sudden your team could be that much better every single year. That's how you get it done. So starting off in segment number 2 with these sound bites from Matt Miller and Jordan Reid, we'll actually start with Jordan Reid. He has in his latest mock draft, he picked Christian Gonzalez, number 7, to the Raiders. So I asked him straight up, well, what was the decision? Why did he go with Christian Gonzalez over Devin Witherspoon out of Illinois? Because I think Witherspoon actually is probably the better fit with what the Raiders and Patrick Graham wants to do. But again, I'm not the guy who's making the mock draft. That was Jordan Reid. So I just asked him what went into the decision to pull Christian Gonzalez over Witherspoon.
Yeah, I'll go first. Just addressing the Gonzalez over Witherspoon. There's mixed opinions as far as who the top guy is on teams' boards. Some teams like Witherspoon, some teams like Gonzalez. But I think the big difference between both of them is just the size. Witherspoon is smaller than Gonzalez. Witherspoon right at 6 foot, 181 pounds, which is what he came in at the combine. And then Gonzalez, 6'2", 200 pounds. So he's much bigger. But as far as the instincts, I think instinctually Witherspoon is ahead of Gonzalez. But I think Witherspoon is the better overall football player. If we're just strictly talking about the cornerback position, he's much more physical than Gonzalez too. So I think when it comes down to it, I have Gonzalez rated a little bit higher just from a size perspective. And then also Witherspoon is not healthy right now either. He's battling the hamstring injury, so we don't have any testing numbers, which I think is going to hurt him a little bit with some teams. I think he has his pro day here coming up soon in the next week or so. So we'll see how he does end up testing. But there's a lot of pros and cons for both of those guys. But I just feel more comfortable taking Gonzalez right now just because of what we've seen on tape and then also throughout the pre-draft process.
So there you go. He likes Christian Gonzalez. He likes the length of Christian Gonzalez. And the one thing I do like about Gonzalez is his length. The guy is 6'2" as opposed to Witherspoon, where he's about 5'11". But he plays tough. And the only thing about Witherspoon, the reason I actually had an opportunity to talk to him at the combine is because he was in the medical tent for so long. He was doing his going through it, and then found out he didn't even work out at the combine because he has a hamstring injury, which Jordan Reid actually alluded to that. He's got a hamstring injury right now. So that is kind of troubling. If you're going to pick a guy, you want to make sure he's going to be available and that injuries aren't something that's going to stick with him all the time. So hopefully this hamstring injury for Witherspoon is minor, and it's just something he can get over. Again, I don't care which player they grab. If they grab Gonzalez or Witherspoon, I'd be happy with both because I think both guys at the corner position are difference makers. So then I went on to ask Matt Miller about Anthony Richardson. And remember, this was Friday. So this was right after the pro day that Anthony Richardson had on Thursday. So I asked Matt Miller, who I've known for a very long time, how much did he help out the Cardinals, who have that number 3 spot in the draft? Now a lot of teams want to trade up. Do a lot of teams want to trade up for Anthony Richardson now? And then does he see him as a guy who could fit with what head coach Josh McDaniels wants to do offensively? Pretty lengthy answer here from Matt Miller.
Yeah, Q, good to talk to you, buddy. I will say, Anthony Richardson, not only has he made himself money, he's definitely helped the Arizona Cardinals with the value of that pick, especially right now we have so much uncertainty at the quarterback position, like in Indianapolis. Do you really feel comfortable with QB4 potentially. So I think there's a lot of pressure on teams like that to slide up. Definitely the Raiders, the Falcons, and Commanders can keep saying they're rolling with last year's rookies. We'll see if that actually happens or not. But I do think Arizona is in a great spot to say either we're going to draft the best defender in this class, whomever they think that is, or we could trade out a little bit. And in your perfect world, you just flip one spot and maybe pick up some extra draft capital, which they really badly need there. Now, as to your point of does Anthony Richardson fit Josh McDaniels? I mean, I'll go back to the point that, and I'm not comparing these players, but Josh McDaniels is the one who drafted Tim Tebow. Like, he saw the evolution of the game and said, hey, you know what? This guy can't be stopped because he's such a threat as a runner and a passer. I'm going to draft him. Now, Anthony Richardson is 4 million miles ahead of where Tim Tebow was as a passer coming out of college. And we know, like, he needs some time. He even said that at the pro day. He needs some time to, work on some mechanical things. Playing behind Jimmy Garoppolo would definitely give you that advantage, but your scheme is going to adjust. Going from Derek Carr to Jimmy G to Anthony Richardson is a pretty big change. But I think there are some elements you could keep. But I mean, it's just like when Kyle Shanahan drafted Trey Lance. We all geeked out about the things they can do in that offense now that they have somebody that can actually move around. Now, we haven't been able to see it, but I think it is proof that these guys that run somewhat conventional offenses can get excited as well by someone that brings an athletic element to the position like we've maybe never seen before. I mean, from a testing standpoint, we've never seen anyone like Anthony Richardson. And I'm a believer that we've already seen a ton of development in his game from, the end of the year at Florida to the to the combine. And what we saw yesterday at the pro day, it shows the work he's put in. And I love the fact that he's speaking to, hey, I have work to do and I'm working on it. And I'm excited to prove to people that I can get this work done. So he has aced this process every step of the way. And to me, there's no doubt that wherever he goes, like, he has the mental ability, the athletic ability to develop and fit into whatever system they need him to.
So yeah, I would not be shocked if multiple teams try to trade up to that number 3 spot. That show that Anthony Richardson put on, and you can't really take too much away from the pro days just because they're scripted. There's no pass rush. There's no defenders. There's no pads. I mean, you know what it is. It's glorified. It's a glorified combine. But at the same time, just seeing what he was able to do and realizing that he's only had 13 games under his belt as far as college play. If you allow that guy to develop a little bit, boy, how good can he be? So here's Jordan Reid also talking about quarterback Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, and just on Anthony Richardson, he's just really inexperienced right now. He's only started 13 games, and I don't even count 2 years ago when he was rotating time with Emory Jones, just because there were situations where they didn't even know who was going to start the next series. So it's really hard to lock in and just play the game like that, just speaking from a former quarterback's perspective, when you don't know if you're even going to start the next series or not. So I don't even count that 2021 season when we saw him play in spots. But just speaking on last year, the big thing with Anthony is that he's just so physically gifted. We saw what he was able to do throwing wise and then also testing wise at the combine. So those type of traits are already going to intrigue teams. He already has the size too, at 6'4", 235 pounds. And I think Anthony is a little bit more detailed at the position than what people are giving him credit for. You see him making big throws inside the pocket, and he's not your typical athletic quarterback that you see that likes to use their superpower of what I call out-athleting everybody, which just means they're just the best player on the field and they're going through one read and then trying to take off. Anthony's not really doing that. The thing with Anthony is that he's really good with reading and reacting with things. The thing that he has troubles with is tying his feet to his eyes. That's the big issue that he has right now. His feet are just a mess. And the reason behind that is that he just hasn't played a lot of games. And then there's a lot of looks that confuse him. So when you just think of a quarterback from the top down, whenever you're confused from a mental standpoint, it's going to have an effect on your feet. And the Kentucky game is a great example of that, of where he just wasn't good in that game just because they made head coach Mark Stoops did a really good job of creating some confusing looks for him, and that really affected his feet a lot. So I think with Anthony, the intrigue is there with him, but you're going to have to be patient with him. Now, I will say this: the tricky thing about Anthony's evaluation is that the only way he's going to work out the kinks with those things is for him to play. But obviously, he's not going to be ready walking through the door. So the team that drafts him, they have to have patience. but understand the only way that he's going to work out those kinks and get better with his footwork is that he's going to have to play.
So there's Jordan Reid's thoughts on Anthony Richardson. And really, this turns into almost the Anthony Richardson segment, right? Again, C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young, I don't think those guys are touchable. I think they go 1-2, and it doesn't necessarily have to be Stroud and then Young. It could be Young and Stroud. But I think by the time the number 2 pick is done with, both those guys will be off the board. So really, I start with Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. And really, I'm not a big fan of Will Levis. Now, that doesn't mean he's not going to be a good quarterback. It just means I'm not a big fan. And I'll tell you, on the whole hour-long call, no one asked about Kentucky quarterback Will Levis. Now, again, doesn't mean that he's not going to be good. Just let you know where the interest level was. And maybe a lot of our interest was on Anthony Richardson because his pro day was just the day before, and it's kind of the last thing we saw, kind of prisoner of the moment type situation. But nobody on an hour call asked anything about Will Levis. So one more soundbite here in segment number 2, and then we'll get to your calls and texts coming up in segment number 3. Here's Matt Miller and Jordan Reid on if there's a quarterback worth taking in the back end of round 1 or even as late as round 3. Here they are talking about the later quarterbacks, the outside of the top 4.
Yeah, I could jump in first on that one, Jordan. I really do. I like Hendon Hooker a lot. I think 22 might be a little early for a player who is 25 years old, who's also coming off the knee injury. So that would be the biggest question for me is, where's he at in terms of health? We saw him at the Tennessee Pro Day, like throwing a soft toss to his guys, not really getting involved. So I would see it, Jameson, maybe as, could you trade back from 22? Like you mentioned, there's no second round pick. If you identify this as like, hey, we got to get a quarterback because Lamar is forcing his way out, or has said he's not going to play, whatever that might be, or maybe the team has moved on. I think you probably try to trade back. Jordan might feel differently. I don't like this day 3 quarterback class very much at all. It's just, there's a drop-off, a significant drop-off from the top 4, then Hendon Hooker, who maybe deserves to be in, maybe it should be a top 5. But then I think you're looking at a lot of, projects where it's like maybe Aiden O'Connell, maybe Jaron Hall would be your top day 3 guy.
Yeah, I think the Ravens are in such a unique spot just because they've really built this offense so uniquely around Lamar Jackson. This isn't an offense of where you just can drop a quarterback in, and Ty Monken, we'll see what he does as far as adjusting some things that they have done previously. But their offense has been built around Lamar Jackson, a lot of 12 personnel, a lot of tight ends involved. They've taken some opportunities at drafting wide receivers early, but it just hasn't necessarily worked out. So of the day 3 quarterbacks, the one that I think probably would fit best in the offense is probably Dorian Thompson-Robinson of UCLA, just because he has a lot of similar qualities that Lamar Jackson brings to the table from a mobility standpoint, and then also just involving him in the design quarterback run game. So there's some similar traits as far as if you want to keep some similar things that they have done in years past with Lamar Jackson. So DTR will be one that I think they could gravitate towards, maybe in like the 4th or the 5th round. I think that's where he could end up going.
So there you go. That name, Hendon Hooker, always pops up, right? And I think that's a name and a player that the Raiders are intrigued by as well. Another guy that could sit behind Jordan Reid, or not Jordan Reid. Jordan Reid's actually talking about the draft, but sit behind Jimmy G, and sit and learn the game, right? And I mean, that's what it's all about. And that's where Anthony Richardson and Hendon Hooker, I think, they both would fit in well with what the Raiders are trying to do because they could sit behind Jimmy G. I mean, they've got their quarterback for 2023, barring injury. They would hope that he's going to play throughout the course of the season. If they were to get a Bryce Young or a C.J. Stroud, it would almost be like they're forced to play him pretty quickly. So at least with Richardson, even Richardson, Levis, Hendon Hooker, anybody who's a later round pick, you feel pretty comfortable that they could just sit behind Jimmy G and try to learn. And hopefully sooner rather than later, they're not forced into action because of injury, but when they get into action, it's because they're ready to take over as QB1. So there you go. Jordan Reid and Matt Miller just talking quarterbacks, really just Anthony Richardson and, of course, Hendon Hooker. And then I also had to get that question in about the cornerback position, Christian Gonzalez and Devin Witherspoon. Coming up in segment number 3, your calls and text straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. That is next here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Here we go, Raider Nation, segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, closing things out strong. Went a little long in those first 2 segments, so we'll only be able to get a couple calls and text in real quick, but let's go ahead and jump right into it. 707-654-4693. Raider Matt in the OC, he's calling to talk about Anthony Richardson after hearing Friday's podcast, and he's starting to buy into the hype, ladies and gentlemen. Here he is, Raider Matt in the OC.
What's up, Q? This is Raider Matt calling from Miami. Wanted to call in after listening to Friday's podcast, and it was a kind of central focus on Anthony Richardson. And I'm starting to buy into the Anthony Richardson hype. And hear me out. I know that he's raw. I know that he hasn't played a lot of meaningful college games or college games in general. But I think everyone is saying how bought in everyone will be on Caleb Williams next year. And I wanted to point out that Anthony Richardson and Caleb Williams, to me, feel very, very similar. And here's why. I'm a big SC fan, so I was able to watch Caleb Williams a lot this year, and he's that dude. Not to take anything away from Caleb Williams at all, like we're comparing him to Anthony Richardson, but Caleb Williams is that dude. And Anthony Richardson, I think, has very similar characteristics style-wise and athletically than Caleb Williams does. I'm not going to lie, I haven't watched much Anthony Richardson games. I've watched some tape and watched some YouTube videos just to kind of see who the guy was and see if he'd be a good prospect. And there's definitely flashes of Anthony Richardson being that dude. But this is really his first year playing, and it wasn't a super QB-friendly system like Lincoln Riley has. Lincoln Riley, you could look at the past quarterbacks that he's had. I mean, he's put a ton of people in great positions to be successful. Baker Mayfield, Jalen Hurts, just to name the two most recent examples that I could think of. And that system's going to make any good QB look even better. So Anthony Richardson, hearing the podcast on Friday morning that he's a very knowledgeable football player, wants to learn, wants to be better. If you put that guy into a system and work with a coach that is a QB guru like Josh McDaniels should be and is supposed to be, I think that Anthony Richardson might be a guy, if available at 7, you can't pass up. And he can sit behind Jimmy G for a year, learn, develop, get better. And the dude is only 20 years old. I mean, shoot, that's the QB of the future if he's available for us. Because I know we ain't going to, unless we have the number 1 pick, we're not getting Caleb Williams next year. So you're going to have to trade up next year if that's the guy you want. So if Anthony Richardson is available, I think you got to strike, because that could be the hidden gem in this draft that isn't getting talked about enough. Let me know what you thought. What your thoughts are, Q. Raider Matt out.
Thanks, Raider Matt, for the call. Appreciate you. And that's the part about Richardson that intrigues me really the most. I mean, we know that he's athletic. We know he's big, he's strong, he's fast. But the intelligence and the work ethic are two things that you can't teach. You can't teach anyone a work ethic. They either have it or they don't. And you can't teach a person to be intelligent. Either they're going to have football smarts and they're going to be able to figure out what the coach is trying to have them do, or they won't. Right? I mean, it's no doubt about it. Like I said in segment number 2, he's a guy that can sit behind Jimmy G and not be forced to play immediately. So I know that there's less than a month before the draft. I know that he wasn't quarterback 1 for me. It was C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young. But those two guys, as far as I'm concerned, are off the board. So if the Raiders are going to go offense and go with the quarterback, I'm definitely leaning towards Anthony Richardson. But I still, gut feeling tells me they're going to go with the defensive player at number 7, and they're going to get a dominant player at number 7. So thank you so much for that call. I do appreciate you. Next up, I'll get a tweet in. How about a tweet from Drew Taylor at Homie Cracker on Twitter? First of all, nice Twitter name. But he says, "What's up, Q? Thanks for bringing all the good quotes and nuggets from the owners' meetings. A lot of good questions and insight there. My question for the pod is, why are leaks coming out about what the Raiders are going to do this year? Last year, there was 0 indications of moves being made before they happened. Adams, Chandler Jones, draft picks, those are all perfect examples. This year, it's Raiders tried to move up. Raiders like this player is off the board, etc. Is this all just draft smoke or people throwing crap against the wall hoping it'll stick? Or is there suddenly leaks in the Raiders front office and they aren't running the tight-lipped ship we thought they would have like last year? Love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for all you do, Q. You're the voice of the Raider Nation. Raiders." That's from Drew Taylor at Homie Cracker on Twitter. Thanks so much for the tweet, my man. I do appreciate you. And I'm definitely not the voice of Raider Nation. Raider Nation does not need anyone to have a voice. Raider Nation's voice is loud and proud, and that's the beautiful thing about the fan base, right? Everyone in this fan base, in my opinion, is so smart, and it's always, so football knowledgeable. That's why I always enjoy having conversations with members of Raider Nation. But there's multiple reasons why you're hearing things now. This staff doesn't let things get out, one, that it doesn't want to let out. So there's a few things that get out here and there. Also, it's now the second year, and so a lot of these guys are more comfortable in the position that they're in, and they're more comfortable with people on the outside of the building that they're talking to. Like last year when they got there, think about it, they didn't know any of us, right? I mean, they barely knew who a Vinny Bonsignore was, or a Vic Tafur, or a Tashawn Reid, right? I mean, they didn't know any of us, really. I mean, except for the very short interactions that they had. So it was a little bit easier to keep things tight-lipped, but Also, I do believe that because it is draft season and it is Lion season, there's a lot of stuff that's not getting out right now. Now, the whole thing about guys getting taken off the draft board, I mean, Josh McDaniels told us straight up that that's not the case. So I don't believe that's the case, even though I would be very shocked if the Raiders went and took Jalen Carter at number 7. But as far as moving up, that was something that when you start to go and make a trade like that or try to attempt to make a trade to get all the way up to the number 1 point in the draft, people are going to find out about that. That's like something that you just can't avoid because you're talking to another team. You're negotiating with another team. So they're going to let it be known as well. So that's how I found out what they offered, right? And if I haven't talked about it on the show, which I thought I did, but if I haven't, they offered the same exact thing that Carolina offered, but they offered Darren Waller and Carolina offered DJ Moore. So they rather have DJ Moore and the number 9 pick than Darren Waller and the number 7 pick. So there was that. But that's how I found out about what they offered him was at the owners' meetings, talking to people that covered the Chicago Bears and people that covered the Panthers as well, just having conversations with them. And then it was confirmed by someone else. So, yeah, I mean, it's just that's how stuff like that starts to leak out. But thank you so much for that tweet. And I guess the final thing on that is you don't have to worry about a whole lot getting out of the building. It's not going to be a case scenario where someone calls up the podcast voicemail line and says, hey, this is who they're taking at number 17. I play Xbox with the guy. Hey, that's not going to happen, right? I know that did happen. That happened when Alex Leatherwood was selected. We literally had a call on our Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line and said, Q, I know that Alex Leatherwood is going to be the pick at 17. I play Xbox with the guy, and he told me that. And boom, it happened. And then they also turned around and said, oh, they're playing the Baltimore Ravens first week of the year, Monday Night Football at Allegiant Stadium. And boom, it happened, all because he played Xbox with someone that was inside the building. So thank you so much for that. I do appreciate you. Finally, we close out with a call from Jacob in Fresno. He's calling to talk about Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler and the fact he feels pretty good about knowing how these guys think. Here he is, Jacob in Fresno.
Hey, Q, Jacob from Fresno. I was listening to your podcast the past few days, and I think I'm getting a little bit better understanding the way Josh and Dave all kind of work as far as what they're looking for, what their ultimate plan is. And I got to tip my cap a little bit to Josh McDaniels for the way he's approaching quarterbacks in the draft. And a lot of people would expect him to name off just the top 4, but he was going back in the later rounds, especially him, listing, Jake Hayner and O'Connell from Purdue, I believe it is, that he's really taken a deep dive into every single quarterback that's available that could possibly play, in his system in the draft. So it's a little bit reassuring that he's just, that they're not just attracted to big names and that they are trying to thoroughly go through everything. And I'm hoping that I'm looking forward to it because with 12 draft picks, you could do so many. And I think that a lot of the fan base is actually really excited because when's the last time we had this many draft picks? And then also there's a possibility of what you can do with them, because you don't have to necessarily just stay with the 12. With so many, you could trade up or, with where your position, you could trade back and gain more. It just depends. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm thinking that I think that we're going to probably get some good quality players. It's definitely going to be a lot more on the defensive side since we have so many wide receivers now signed. But that's not to say we won't probably sign a few more in draft. So we'll see what happens. But I am excited towards the future of what the draft can hold. Have a good one.
Thanks so much for the call, my man. I think the biggest thing is trying to get to know what these guys can or willing to do moving forward, right? We just don't know until we actually see a complete draft. I feel like he did, and Dave Ziegler did pretty good in the draft last year with a limited amount of draft capital. I want to see what he's able to do with a full-fledged hand of everything, right? First round pick, second round pick, all your picks. They have 12 picks right now. I would love to see him navigate his way through a whole draft, trading back, trading up, doing whatever he has to do, using those 12 picks for ammunition to go and get some targeted players that he believes could be big-time players for the Raiders moving forward. That excites me. That intrigues me about this upcoming draft. And look, we're less than a month away, and we'll start to get the answers. Round 1 being on April 27th in Kansas City. So excited about that. I feel like I have a good idea what they think and what they're looking for. But until we actually see a full draft and everything put together and the plans start to come together, we still kind of don't know yet. And I hate to say that we don't know yet, but I'm sure we'll start to know sooner rather than later. And then hopefully they're able to stay consistent, that front office stay consistent and be that same front office for a while. So, they can start to build a reputation like Seattle has with really good drafts, or the Baltimore Ravens have with really good drafts. There's certain teams, and I say it all the time, there's certain teams that do really well in the draft. The 49ers as of late, right? John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan didn't do good at first when they first took over, but it didn't take them long to figure it out. They got where they need to be quick, fast, and in a hurry. So if the Raiders can kind of take that John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan kind of mold and follow it and do what they do, and with Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels, that'll be a good thing for Raider Nation, and more importantly, it'll be a really good thing for the Silver and Black. So that's all I got time for on today's show. We'll get more texts and more calls and more tweets. We'll have more news and notes, maybe a couple more breakdowns from Matt Miller and Jordan Reid coming up on tomorrow's show, but who knows what the rest of today will hold in store, right? Who knows? We'll see. But until then, Raider Nation, appreciate you as always, making the show your first listen each and every day. If you're checking us out on YouTube, we appreciate you. Subscribe to it and tell my man Ari that he's doing a good job at Ari Produces on Twitter. But until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.